morning. So I'm sure that you have noticed that for the entire month of February, it's been our youth group, and Jeremy, who has led us in worship, and that is not a small thing. To be able to stand up and speak up in the name of Jesus, that is about as good as it gets, so thank you. Thank you to all you parents and grandparents and teachers and everyone who is helping to teach and train our young people who are now teaching and training us. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge and welcome the new members to our family who were baptized last week. I think some of them are in the back there. Alton and Ryder Dowling, as well as Jada, Josiah, and Jackson Brown, sitting back there in the back. Be sure and meet them. Welcome them to the family. Glad that you're here today, by the way. If you're a guest of ours, we are honored to have you with us. We are so glad that you're here. Thank you for choosing to worship God with us today. Heard a story about an accordion player who was driving home after a concert one night. It was late, he was hungry. So he stops at a little roadside diner to get a bite to eat. About halfway through his meal, he realizes that although he'd locked his car, he left his accordion right in plain view in the back seat. So he rushes out to the parking lot, only to find out that he's too late. Sure enough, someone has smashed in his back window and thrown 2 more accordions into his back seat. You know, the definition of perfect pitch is being able to throw the accordion into the dumpster without hitting the sides, right? My apologies to all of you accordion players out there. Okay? But I tell you that bad joke to make this point. You know, we all know what it's like to get something that we don't want, right? We understand that feeling. How about getting something that we don't deserve? It's a little bit different, isn't it? When we get something that we don't deserve, be it good or bad, getting something that we don't deserve. We've spent the last several weeks talking about the fact that Jesus' coming and Jesus' teaching was such a game changer to the human race. How the coming of Jesus shaped civilization for the past 2,000 years and moving forward. We're wrapping up that sermon series this morning with one of the most impactful, one of the most transformative, maybe one of the most obvious ways that Jesus was a game changer, and that is, Jesus was a game changer when it comes to mercy. 2,000 years ago, the idea of showing mercy and extending mercy to someone wasn't on anyone's radar. No one did that. The idea of being merciful wasn't something that was talked about, let alone practiced. And then Jesus shows up, and he puts mercy on the map like never before. And in his landmark message, Sermon on the Mount, he really starts to unpack what life in the kingdom looks like on a spiritual level, but also down in the live life level. And he begins that famous sermon by saying, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." And you and I are so familiar with the Beatitudes, and we're so familiar with that phrase that Jesus just, "Blessed are the merciful, they will receive mercy." We kind of blow right by it. It's hard for us to appreciate the countercultural bomb that Jesus just plants here in this sermon. It was radical. It was a game changer. Because up until that point, no one talked about mercy in glowing, honorable ways. In the Roman world, showing mercy was not something that was celebrated at all. There's all kinds of reasons for that. I'll give you a couple reasons. One was, that was a culture that valued justice above everything else. Justice was so important in that culture. And to give someone mercy, to give someone something that they didn't earn, that just kind of went against the grain of what the culture was all about. I'm not going to give someone mercy when they didn't earn it. That's not just. That's not what we're built on. Here's another reason. There was a very strong belief that if you were poor, if you were handicapped, if you were disabled in some way, if you were what we might call being a victim of circumstance, you were actually being judged by the gods. You were getting what you deserved. And to interfere with someone would be interfering with the justice of the gods. So mercy wasn't meted out to anyone in that particular position. Another reason why showing mercy wasn't celebrated was because it went exactly contrary to how humans gained and kept power, position. I'm not going to show you mercy because then you're going to take advantage of me. And I'm going to lose my position. I might lose some resources. People are going to stop fearing me if I show you mercy. And then on top of that, you take a look at the Roman gods and the Greek gods. They didn't show mercy. And so if the gods didn't show mercy up there, why should we show mercy down here? I mean, it's every man for himself. You got to look out for yourself because no one else is going to be looking out for you. So when Jesus starts talking about mercy, he stuns his audience for a couple reasons. First, he starts talking about mercy as being a fundamental tenet of what life in the kingdom is going to look like. He's making it clear that not only does God show mercy, but God blesses people who show mercy. And that if you are merciful to someone, you're not as at risk as your culture might deem you to be. Not only does Jesus drop this bombshell in the middle of the Roman culture, he also drops a bombshell in the middle of his own culture, especially to the Pharisees, to the religious teachers of the law, the Jews. For instance, Matthew chapter 9, verse 13, Jesus says this. He's reacting, the religious leaders have been reacting negatively to Jesus eating with tax collectors and notorious sinners. So Jesus says to them, but go and learn what this means. Hey, just stop for a minute. Why don't you go figure out what this means? I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. For Jesus, eating with tax collectors and notorious sinners was an act of mercy. Quoting the prophet Hosea, Jesus is saying God desires mercy toward another human being more than he desires some ritual work of worship, some sacrifice in the temple. He would rather you show mercy than keep the letter of the law with the sacrifices. And Jesus won't let this verse go, by the way. A couple chapters later, in chapter 12, verse 7, he again laments, if you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Over and over and over again, Jesus keeps driving this home. And when he's talking about mercy, it's not always talking about forgiveness. He's not always talking about fellowshipping with notorious sinners and spiritual outsiders. For example, Matthew chapter 9, 2 blind men call out for Jesus to have mercy on them, heal them. Matthew 15, a woman calls on Jesus to have mercy on her for the sake of her daughter, who was demon-possessed. Matthew chapter 17, a man calls for Jesus to have mercy on his epileptic son through healing him. Those stories, other stories as well, mercy's not necessarily just about forgiveness. It's also compassion in action. Mercy isn't just about forgiveness, isn't just about healing. It's also about reaching out to include people who are physically handicapped, physically impaired, which was very significant in the culture that Jesus was teaching in the world that Jesus walked into. Because to the Pharisees, anyone who is handicapped, anyone who is deformed, anyone who is impaired physically, spiritually, emotionally, those people were unable to reflect the perfect image of God. And so to the Pharisee, those people were not allowed inside the temple. If you were deformed, if you were handicapped in some way, you weren't allowed inside the temple because the belief was you could not reflect the holy image of God. Now, we hear that and we think that's crazy. How can that possibly be? Put on top of that the fact that the Pharisees prided themselves in treating their home the same way they treated the temple. And so they were never going to add to the guest list of any banquet they had at their home, any meal they had at their home, anyone who they believed didn't reflect the perfect image of God. So anyone who was crippled, anyone who was lame, anyone who was handicapped in some way would never be on the guest list for a Pharisee. I tell you all that so you can appreciate the bomb that Jesus drops when he says things like this, Matthew 14:13. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Jesus is telling these Pharisees, you need to deliberately be adding these people to your guest list. You need to have the disabled, the castaways, the people that other people have kind of forgotten about. You need to invite them into your home. But of course, a Pharisee would never do that. It was a slap in their face. And again, Jesus just keeps driving this message home. It says in Matthew 23:23, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He's talking to the teachers of the law. Pharisees, woe to you, you bunch of hypocrites. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Jesus is chastising the teachers of the law. He's chastising these Pharisees who've been so meticulous in keeping the details of the law, but they've missed what Jesus calls the more important matters. Jesus is telling them, you have been majoring in minors. You're making such a big deal about these things. They're not that big a deal. You're missing the majors. You need to be majoring in the majors. You've lost sight of what the prophet Micah said about God. When Micah says this, he showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. And then the same prophet Micah says this, he's talking about God. You, God, you do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, but God delights in showing mercy. Isn't that great? That God delights in showing mercy. And then he also tells us, I want you to love mercy. Let me ask you a question. How many of you love mercy? I love mercy. Well, we all love it when it's to us, right? I love when someone is merciful to me. But that's not what the prophet's talking about. How many of you delight in showing mercy to someone? How many of you I love showing mercy? God does. I think too many times we lose sight of the fact that we need to love mercy. I think too many times we might see our worship as nothing but kind of a vertical arrangement. My worship is all about me and God. It just goes this way. And we kind of forget that worship is also horizontal as well. My worship involves you. Your worship involves me. How I treat you. How you treat me. In the 5th century, there was a Syrian monk named Simeon who grew so disgruntled with what he saw as casual Christianity that he placed a 50-foot pole in the ground. And on top of that 50-foot pole, he built a very small platform. And he crawled to the top of the 50-foot pole. And he sat on that platform. He thought he'd be closer to God that way. So he went there so he could pray and to fast. This monk stayed on top of that very small platform for 37 years. Google it. 37 years. He stayed on top of that platform, praying and fasting to God. It's a man that was convinced that worship is just between me and God. But you read the teaching of Jesus when it comes to mercy, and Jesus wants us to know that worship happens at the bottom of the pool too. Worship is absolutely this way, but is also absolutely horizontal as well. God's emphasis on mercy reminds us of that. How we treat each other matters. That's worship too. So, let me try to land this lesson and this series with a couple takeaways. We talk about mercy. And here's the first, and it's pretty simple. Mercy begins with me. Becoming merciful has a lot to do with me realizing just how badly I need mercy. Check out what Jesus said in Luke chapter 18. I don't have it on the screen, but it's going to sound very familiar to you. Jesus is going to tell a story. Luke 18:9. To some who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everybody else, Jesus told this parable. So he's telling a story to everybody who has it all figured out. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you, this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. Maybe one of the reasons why Pharisees weren't known for being merciful is because they didn't realize just how desperately they needed mercy themselves. Mercy begins with me. And it begins with an awareness of just how much I need mercy. That's why Paul would say things like this in Titus 3:5. He saved us not because of the righteous things we've done, but because of His mercy. God saved us not because we're so good, but because He is so merciful. Which brings me to a second takeaway. Mercy is a gift. It's not a wage. You know, whenever you hear someone say something about someone like, they don't deserve mercy, that person does not understand mercy at all. Story is told about a mother who approached Napoleon Bonaparte once, begging for the life of her son who was sentenced to be executed. And Napoleon told this woman, your son is guilty, and the punishment meets the crime. I can't forgive him of the crime. It would not be justice. The mother told Napoleon, I am not asking for justice. If he deserved it, it wouldn't be justice. That's why I'm not here begging justice. I'm here begging for mercy. And Napoleon granted a pardon for her son. Deserve has nothing to do with it. Not when we're talking about mercy. Psalm 103:10, He does not treat us as our sins deserve, or repay us according to our iniquities. That's what makes it mercy. You know, Jesus never talked about having compassion on someone because they deserved it. He had compassion on people because that's who He was. That was His nature. Deserve has nothing to do with it. And then at the risk of sounding like Forrest Gump, my third takeaway is mercy is as mercy does. Mercy is as mercy does. Mercy is not an action, it is an action, not just an attitude. Mercy is a verb. We usually use it as a noun, but it's also a verb. Grammatically, I think it can be used as both. If I'm wrong about that, someone will correct me in about 15 minutes. But I think you can use mercy as both a verb and a noun. I do know this, Jesus used it as both. And Jesus used it as a verb just as often as He used it as a noun. Because mercy involves action. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan, Luke chapter 10. Jesus tells that story about a man who was beaten by robbers. He's left on the side of the road, and 3 people come and walk by him. One is a priest, a Jewish man, and he sees this man beaten on the side of the road, so he crosses the road and walks by on the other side. Then a Levite comes by, another Jewish man, and he sees this Jewish man that is beaten on the side of the road. He crosses the road and walks by on the other side. And then, lo and behold, a Samaritan comes along, the sworn enemy of the Jews, a hated Samaritan. He's the guy who stops, attends to the man's wounds, puts him on his own donkey, brings him to a place where he can rest and heal, pays for it all. And then Jesus asks the question to the crowd, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Luke 10:37, the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Who was the neighbor? It was the guy who did something. It was the guy who responded. He was the man who took action. And then Jesus says, go and do likewise. There's my story. Who is the neighbor? The guy who had mercy. Go and do likewise. Notice Jesus doesn't say, go and feel likewise. Or go and think likewise. Go and argue. Go and rationalize likewise. Jesus says it's a simple story. You understand the implications. You understand who the neighbor was. You understand who did the right thing. Go and do likewise. Mercy is as mercy does. And of course, the greatest example of mercy doing is what the person who told that story, the prodigal son, the Good Samaritan, the person who told that story did on the cross. The greatest example of mercy is what Jesus showed us and what Jesus accomplished at the cross. Take a look at this video.
I've been caught outright and dragged straight into open daylight. Bystanders gawking, the village women absorbing every morsel of gossip. Common decency dictated that the shame of the moment was enough. But the law called for something greater. My life. Of course, a long audience followed behind. Don't think I didn't recognize a couple of them. Their words condemned me, but they didn't dare look me in the eye. I did everything to try to cover my shame, but I couldn't hide from the onlookers or this holy man whose feet they threw me to. I was finished. I stared at the ground when he said that whoever was sinless, they should go first. They should throw the first stone. Squeezed my eyes shut, grasping at the gravel, waiting for the end of my life to unfold. Nothing, though. Then footsteps. Except they were walking away. I looked up. Is there no one left to accuse you? He asked me. No. I don't either. He said, go and sin no more. Accusers. That's how he ended up on the cross. And as he hung there dying, he didn't say, I am finished. He said, it is finished. That's something different. That's a different thing. It means that something is accomplished, restored. He restored my hope. my self-respect and my dignity. I didn't even know I had any left. On a day when I thought that my life was finished, the only man there holy enough to demand justice handed me mercy.
The only one holy enough to demand justice offered me mercy. Jesus came to change the game, change the world. And when he hung on the cross, he knew he'd done it. He'd finished what he came to do. The crowd shouted, "No mercy," N-O, no mercy. Jesus hung on the cross that we might know mercy. K-N-O-W. No mercy. The coming of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus changes the stories that we celebrate. Changes how we respond to our enemies. We talked about that. It changes how we treat and respect women. We talked about that. It changes how we think about love and humility. Changes what we think about mercy. Jesus is a game changer. And so my question as we close this thing out to you is, who in your network of relationships, who in your sphere of influence could use a little mercy this week? Who do you know that needs mercy? They might not deserve it. In fact, if it's mercy, they won't deserve it. Who do you know that needs mercy? Maybe it's someone who's hurt you, that needs forgiveness. Maybe it's a member of your own family. Maybe it's just someone that you know is struggling financially, physically, emotionally. Who do you know that could use a little mercy this week? And then how long has it been since you paused and thanked God for his unlimited, unmerited, unending mercy that he gives us every day? His mercies are new every morning. He's shown you what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. As a church family, if we can help you in any way to do any of that, we've got a song we're going to sing. It's a song of encouragement. There'll be some people here at the front of the auditorium. If we can pray with you about something, if we can help you, serve you in any way, come to the front and let us know. Let's go ahead and be standing, and we'll sing.